Hi everyone, welcome to week 5's the lecture. Feel free to watch it at a 1.5 or 1.25 speed. I feel like I can talk quite slowly sometimes. I wanted to go over a few things. I'll just share my screen. And let's line ourselves up. Just an acknowledgement to country. I'm recording this where we live in the beautiful Tamarama, home to the Gadigal, Bidjigal and Birrabirral people of past millennia. And certainly one thing I always appreciate is the naming and where these words come from, and Tamarama being the place of storms and Bondi as the crashing of waves. In this lecture, I wanted to go over some things. We will do this, and then we will look at quite a lot of other projects about materials and ideas dealing with design that I think might be relevant to where people are going with assignment 2 and moving into assignment 3. Let's go over some things like fundamental assets. What might they be? So think what is unchangeable or mostly unchangeable and of the place. So therefore, it's site-specific. I do keep repeating this as a theme within this studio. Certainly, I've had a few one-on-ones with people in the past couple of days, and this is a topic we've been repeating on about. And I just have been putting a few fundamental assets together of the site that I think. You may have other ones, you may have variations on these ones, but I think some of these become helpful, and they become helpful because when you're making design decisions, you refer back to these and you make a better design decision. So I think on our site, I think it has a horizon obstructed sunrise and sunset. So last year's site at White Bay had the most amazing sunrise and sunset with a horizon line that had the Sydney Harbour Bridge in it on one side, and it was framing a sunset from the through the power station on its western side. Carrington does not have that. When you look up the streets running east-west particularly, you see big buildings, or you see a ship passing. You almost never see the horizon. It's very hard to see the water, let alone the horizon. So I think that's a fundamental asset of this site, and it's quality. So how to use that? Yet my dad's got a big sky, and Google and looking up some weather patterns tells me that the sky there is clearest of clouds for 79% of August. So if anyone's doing something in August, you might like to think that there's less rain in August. That's probably something one could plan for, thinking through Indigenous seasons. It's overcast for 37% of November. It's the cloudiest month in November. The longest day is December 22nd, and the shortest day is June the 21st. It doesn't change on that side. It has a horizon obstructed moonrise and moonset. Yet by night also it's got a big sky and likely a powerful moon experience. And Google tells me it's good around June the 20th. Oh, sorry, Google didn't tell me this bit. I just put 2 and 2 together, but I was thinking if anyone's having an event or doing something, no clues there, Rachel. It could be good around June 21st for an early evening where you could potentially have youth and community and families watching a moonrise, where it's coming up much earlier than it would be in the middle of summer. Something else that's very fundamental to that site is the modified shallow estuary plain, now deepened, which you'll see that I've doubled up as a deep end. Deep End was the name of a wonderful Dutch firm that won the Federation Square competition down in Melbourne in the late 90s and came on to do it. And Renee was one of my master supervisors for a while, but I always appreciated that they called themselves Deep End as they moved from the Netherlands down to Australia. And as I wrote this sentence, I realised I too could look for those double meanings within words. And I always think that is a fun design thing to be thinking of doing. So it's a modified shallow estuary plain, now deepened by dredging to promulgated depths. Promulgated is a word I had never heard of until finding information out about this site. It means promoted or widely known depths. So this is a very particular way of talking about the bathymetry or bathymetry of this site. It has to be dredged, has to be modified every day to these promulgated depths, and they have to be widely known so that the boats know they can come in safely. I think there's something very interesting about that. I'm not even sure what. I'm hoping somebody in the group can make something of that. So it's been modified from its silty, to a silty, murky port. And it's silty and murky because of the disturbed soil. It's not clean, glistening, harbour-like or beach-like water. It's silty and murky. So we don't want to see swimming pool blue in anyone's drawings. You know, the distinctive things about silty is in that Vera video, she didn't see the shark, yet she was right there. It's very hard to see in to that water. It's lightly buffered by Stockton from the lower winds. The high winds would come over Stockton, but the lower winds that are right on the ocean surface would be blocked by Stockton, partly. And it's also lightly buffered from those higher big waves. The working harbour, disturbed underwater harbour life constantly. That's a very weirdly written sentence, Patrick, but I'm just saying from all that dredging, that harbour life is constantly disturbed. Now, which of these attributes are assets is subjective, and that depends or depends on your stakeholder perspective. So a skipper would think that dredging is wonderful. What a terrific job they've done. I can bring my huge ship in here. A bull shark may think very differently to that. It has 2 tidal changes a day, and they meet a 468 kilometre long river. So that means we've got a very dynamic salt and fresh intertidal environment. Another fundamental asset of our site is the toxic soil in need of repair. Now, is it an asset? Well, maybe. It could generate years of fields of sunflowers and goats. You know, it is what it is. So part of being a landscape architect is sort of removing the judgment on the reality of what's happening in the land and just trying to work with it. So look, that toxic soil could generate years of fields of sunflowers and goats, particularly if you've watched Sue Ann Ware's lecture, which you should have all watched twice this year. So the toxicity is a fundamental quality of the site now, in any case, that damages sea and soil life daily, but it does so invisibly. And I think that unto itself is a massive opening for you all. It's also a peninsula of reclaimed land. As you know, it's historically a water island braid. So this reclaimed land acts as a stage or theatre of one of the great shipping maritime events of the world. It's also a suburban nook, which is in fact not the main act on this site, but as I say here, it's attention seeking. It's the thing we kind of drive into when I go to the lunch shop and, you know, the council think about it. But really the main act, roll up, is that big port, this great shipping maritime event of the world. And it's largely unseen. Perhaps the curtains are down. From the minor act. As the school principal said, you know, they know nothing about it. They never go there. The two appear very disconnected. Another fundamental asset. I would say it has light or very little car traffic. Last year's site had a very busy road next to called Anzac Bridge, which was constant with traffic, and it encircled the site. This site doesn't have that, but it has constant global shipping. Global shipping. It is a global shipping node with horns blasting and announcing themselves 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and a national, right across the country, truck, which has diesel engines, shifting gears, sorry about the misspellings, and a national train, which has gliding wheels and clinking parts, National Truck and Train web networks, and they provide a regular multi-scale sliding spatial jolt experience or experiences, and they're largely unseen. And by that I mean, you know, who even gets to see those big boats that slide in and sort of block off the end of a street? Who sort of sees 18 trains slip and sliding past each other? How many people are really encountering those big trucks? Probably quite a lot, particularly up on that top street. Is it Elizabeth Street? But I think there's something very powerful about the movement of that web, and it really defines this site as a node of very much national and international significance. Another fundamental asset, well, now it is flat. It's flat land. It was formerly mounds on Bagamba. I think I've said that right. That provided low to mid elevation and refuge from the damp ground as the confluence of salt and fresh. That's what it was historically. Could any of that be utilised, this idea of refuge from the damp ground? How you could play around with that creatively. It has a modified armoured edge, and I'd say 95%. I'd say to anyone, no, that wouldn't be a bad thing to be showing, that, you know, how much of the percentage is rip-wrapped or armoured and how much isn't. It has vegetation whose ecology is of specific coastal saline scales. But mangroves, salt marsh, seagrasses, mudflats to microbes, now almost all erased. And we have insertions of allowed edge mangroves and streets of colonial splendour. It's not every day you see a crucifix of date palms. Date palms are in fact prized from antiquity, thank you Google, and carried to the New World. And it's no big surprise they're there. Are they date palms or are they one of the other ones? Whichever one it is, you know what I mean. I still think they could be pulled up and put on a ship and sent to the Middle East, if anyone wanted to do that, or not. So streets of colonial splendour and garden delights. Another fundamental asset, it has a pleasant 18 to 23 degrees water temperature. And today, it's not really seen as swimmable because of the dynamic movement of all the ships. But kayaks and canoes, and, you know, it's no big surprise that there's a rowing club, and now ships and ferries, they're likely the of-the-place transport, more than as a swimming hole. It just lacks that safety and the peace of a swimming hole, I suppose. Last year we saw in Sam's White Bay presentation, you know, there was several ideas of reinserting beaches onto that Sydney Harbour foreshore, and I don't think this site has those same fundamental assets like that. They just don't add up so well in that way. They add up in different ways. The winds are very varied across the year. It's windiest, and again, this is Google information, June, September in the westerly. The calmest month for winds is April, which is a southerly, that cool southerly. It's predominantly easterly wind, comes in October and April, October to April. And the impact of the wind is topography dependent. So if you're up higher, it'll be windier. If you're down lower, it will be less so. If you're behind a big building, you'll be protected. If you're behind a big ship, you'll be protected. If that ship moves, you won't be protected. So it's very topography dependent. Thank you, Ben, for putting this video on. I truly adore this image that's within it. And I thank the makers of this film. I wish I had their names up here. But Vera here, you know, looking out, and this idea of fundamental assets and this idea of how you get people to love the place. It's not really about saying that's murky water, it's contaminated soil, it's heavy industry. Vera loves it still. I mean, she's pained and she remembers what it used to be like, but she's still so connected. And I think just getting over the actual sort of what it looks like to actually the systems of how it works, which I think Vera expresses very well in the video. And if you haven't watched it, I think it's crucial watching for the studio. Not unsignificantly, you know, from that same website, I got some of those other details off this weather spark. The area within 3 kilometres of Newcastle is covered by water, so 60%. And with this idea of sea level rise, it's very significant. And so I think people could pick, if they haven't already, to always be jumping in and out of that big scale of Newcastle down to our site, big scale of Newcastle down to our site. I think it becomes really relevant. That's a very significant percentage of any city that I know of in Australia. Certainly a big port like this. Second part that I wanted to just go over a little bit more again is this abiding events phrase. So it was originally written by Tony Swain. I know you've heard me talk a bit about this. I just want to go over it again. And it's from A Place for Strangers Towards a History of Australian Being, Melbourne 1993 edition. And these notes are from my masters, but we've gone over them in class. But this idea, if we come down to that last paragraph, that all the time when we're talking fundamental assets and abiding events, what you're hopefully looking towards is this term of rhythmed events, or a class of events, and that they reside in a place, only this place. Just to read that last sentence again. This brings me to the rationale of the preceding extensive examination of Aboriginal time, for I now wish to show that the tragedy of the dream time is not so much the inaccuracy of translation, but rather the fact that it has blinded us to the true significance of the concept that dreaming is not predominantly temporal, but rather is spatial. So that this idea of being located in place, and again, when I jump back to that sort of image and think that Tamarama is seen as the place of storms and Bondi as the sound of the big waves, it really, is there no better way to describe those two places? So I think this dreaming being spatial, this significance of place, is fundamental to us all as landscape architects in how we understand sight. Picking up that lovely word that Astrid used, this kind of invitation, I just wanted to mention this. This was a project I was working on last year when I was working with Paul Knight down at the Illawarra Local Aboriginal Land Council. I was helping them run an internship program actually and getting lots of young people involved there, which is terrific. But we were working with the University of Wollongong and this wider area called Blue Futures with Dr. Michelle Voyer, and there's Paul Knight and many other people. The Blue Futures is a keystone project at the University of Wollongong as part of the Global Challenges that positions the South Coast as a national leader in the development of blue economies, drawing on ocean and coastal resources for economic development. The Land Council has partnered with Blue Futures on this project to work towards Indigenous Blue Futures, which is a cross-cutting strategy. I think that's meant to say cross-cultural. We will trial a community-based model of sustainable development which places Indigenous knowledge and aspirations at the heart of planning processes. And this is exactly what AILA is asking all landscape architects to be doing, but, particularly with the Connecting to Country document. How do we just keep trying to be understanding Indigenous thinking? And we are trying in this studio this idea of long-term thinking, this idea of abiding events. I'm not Indigenous, I just feel we have to all keep trying, making mistakes, stepping forward. It's okay. And it was great to see a whole University of Wollongong, also doing this. So Blue Futures is a component that will take a lead role in project design and overall project guidance of the strategy. Dr. Michelle Voyer, one of the lead researchers on this project, Michelle is a marine scientist, had commented on the partnership between the Land Council and Blue Futures by stating, Blue Futures sought to reimagine the way in which you might think about ocean use and management. Partnering with the Land Council was core to this vision. This partnership challenged us to think differently about how we could and should design and conduct our research. It allowed us, I love that line. It's like Astrid saying, you set up invitations. You set up invitations by your design interventions for people to re-understand where they live, to reconnect to the port edge on the busy side, to re-get to know Throsby Creek, to re-get to see the silty water that you can't see. Like, you invite people by these possible interventions you're making around the site. It allows us to explore ways in which we could acknowledge country in our lives, our work and our research. That is a very ongoing process. The partnership with the Land Council has enriched our research practice as well as our outcomes. Michelle and the Blue Futures team, suddenly, not suddenly, but, and I see it happening at UNSW as well, which is just terrific, but, there's Welcome to Countries. They have Indigenous staff down at Wollongong really shifting and shaking up the content of every faculty, how they're going about planning and getting people in really early in Indigenous voices and getting them in and hearing what they're having to say and really changing the brief of all sorts of things. And I'm hoping in this studio we have been having a go at that, and it's not perfect. And I wish we had many more Indigenous voices amongst us. But I think we can just keep trying. Part of the Blue Futures languaging was this Blue Futures milestones, about setting up milestone 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's quite similar to how we are working in this studio. Time words, which might be good to keep up your sleeve going forward. You might find yourself contingency planning. I like that word, contingencies. Things are contingent on something else happening before it. You set up a something, a short or long-term event, and then the next stage or phase can't really occur until that happens. Now that seems to me to fit very well with the sea level rising. And just to talk through that, somebody asked me in the last couple of days, well, isn't sea level rising an abiding event? Yes, I guess in some way, but I just hold it a little bit differently. It's less site focused. It's a global phenomenon and it's a global event that's happening and forecast to happen. We all know this. That was new news about 20 years ago. But I just somehow, I don't put it directly into abiding events of the site. Of course it is, but I don't get stuck on that. Don't go, oh, my abiding event is sea level rising. My fundamental asset of the site is sea level rising. It's like saying, my name is human. Okay, we're all humans. I get that, people. What's your name? So all the time, I'm asking you to look to the specific, to the site specific. Time words. Moving goalposts. I don't mind that expression. Oh my God, now what's happening? The goalposts do keep moving on this site. We have a radical collaboration meeting last week, and the state government guy says, oh, there's 3 possible futures. The local government guy says, oh, we only think about 20 to 25 years. The school guy says, we know nothing about the port. The Indigenous guy says, it's all about values. There's moving goalposts all the time, and this negotiation of values is at the heart of how we need to design. And as Sarah said so beautifully, how we look for the space in between these things. So none of your projects will be a perfect fit, but they will all be exploring these possibilities and scenarios. Phasing, staging, milestones, ages and stages, etc. So you could play around with that. Oh, good old befriend, tend and mend. Befriend those who can assist. So this is what we've been doing. With your tutor group, work out your strategy of Napichi. We've done this, but again, this focus was on how the site feels. Now, this aligns with fundamentals of assets. In a way, it's a kind of get to know your friend. How do you make the site your friend? To speak to that, Caroline Hess, how do you get people to love the site? How do you get them to like your friend? You just introduce them. You introduce them. You invite them to the same parties. You sit them together at a table and bid them good night. You just try and get things happening. You acknowledge country in your lives. How do you tend the site? To apply one's attention to deep understanding and listening. Site specificity. The site speaks prior to the actual design. These 2 things align here. And you again, you acknowledge country in your lives and the abiding events. How do you mend, repair, restore to good condition? So maybe you do this mending in stages, phases, by systems and milestones. So perhaps the mend is our design. Again, it's the acknowledgement of country, acknowledging country in your lives and abiding events. So you'll see I'm banging on about the same theme. Here is the site. Again, this is from Vera's video. So this is old footage, but this is a great image as far as being in versus looking at. Like, I think it feels like you're on the water. There's a kayak there filming. I love this withinness of this image. And I encourage you all, when you're making images over the next few days, get as low and as into the image as you possibly can. If you're focusing on children, bring us down to that 1.3 height. If you're focusing on community and groups, then show a community or group in the image. If you want us to have a view from up high because we're looking down on something specifically, then do that. But if you're giving us an experiential shot, get us in there about a 1.5, 1.8 height. As I said at the very beginning of this term, and this has also been coming up in one-on-one quits, I think you do have to decide a little, are you going to adapt or mitigate? So make a decision about it, particularly with this assignment too. If you adapt, it means, what does it mean? It means you're going to let the water in as it rises. So streets will flood, homes will flood. And in the next 10, 20, 30 years, this will increase. So it may not happen much in the next 10 years. It may happen a little bit more in the next 20. By 30 years, it may be happening more frequently. But you've got time. You've got time to do all sorts of possibilities. So can you design to allow people to feel at ease with the water? If they can feel at ease with the water, they can acknowledge country. This person feels at ease with the water. Go, Vera. Now, if you mitigate, you will need to probably look at tidal gates. I feel like I probably could have said, well, yeah, there's a few others. Just build the site up would be another way. You'll need to probably look at tidal gates. So have a go at choosing a site for one. That's like a big scale thing to do. And you are not water engineers like Jamie. But again, from Radical Collaboration, where he disclosed that after all these years of trying to focus on removing channels and gates and things, he finds he is now doing most of his time researching where to put one back in. But I think he's talking about a much bigger scale one. In any case, you'll have a longer window of time of control of water levels if you put one in. It may not be the long-term 300-year solution, but it may buy time. You'll buy yourself some time. So I think own it, make a decision. Don't say, oh, I thought I'd do this, and then I thought I'd put that building there. And that's fine. If you're doing that, put a tidal gate up. Let's see what it looks like. Draw it up, and we can all go, ooh, like, should it be there near the bridge? Should it be back at the mouth entrance? Well, then that's tricky. All the boats have to come. How, just where would you do it? Would you do it on the edge? Would you put little tidal gates at the edge of the streets? Really, the world is your oyster. I think another key thing you have to step into. I was talking with the wonderful Martin, and I'll talk about this, but Martin said, Patrick, I'm just going to put some photo remediation stuff here. And it was here on Portland because he's got quite a lot of Portland. And I said, but Martin, what would the port say? Oh, I don't know, he said. I was just going to put it here. Okay, that's everybody. That is not an answer. From all the information we know about the port and about that lease of 98 years and about the Chinese ownership and about their very publicly declared belief that they want to expand by 50%. In our time frame, be it 10, 20, 30, 50, 100 years, then even moving to 200 or beyond, up to 500, I think we can pretty safely say in this 100-year phase, that port is going to be booming. It's going to be very dominant. So whatever your site is, I think you need to acknowledge this and declare it and make decisions. So if you're focusing on a council-owned area, declare that. And know that the council are not thinking about sea level rise, nor do they have much. I would think they don't have appropriate funds to deal with it. They're not even thinking about it. Not able to declare it to us anyway last week. You can you can draw something up. What a wonderful piece of information it would be for some of the council members to come to your exhibition and see this. It would just be like really powerful. So get clear and have an approach. This is in a way a sort of befriend the neighbours. And I've misspelt it and left out the G, but consider the Napaji. Do you need to trade some land? Which is where I kind of got to with Martin, when Martin and I got to, like, well, Martin, if you want to do that on the port land, I think you better give some of the council land, trade it with the port. You know, you could say that's what you're aiming to. Everybody else can work out the regulations around that. But working with Paul Knight last year, that's exactly what he was trying to do with a site where they were looking at doing an aquaculture scenario, and they needed certain proximity to salt water, and he knew the farmer next door to the land that the land council owned. So he was moving to conversations about, would you be up for swapping some land? We'll give you this bit, you give us that bit. Like, it's Napaji at work. I thought that's brilliant. Is there any better way of saying this than Ben has told us on the Teams general chat? There is a shitload of shoops. That is for sure. And so you can look at the detail of this, but I do think this is a sort of wonderful image of the way this site is part of a much bigger web. And to always be thinking that through. This port, you can't just say, oh, well, I didn't think about that. This port and all these boats and all the countries that these boats come and go to, they need port facilities. And this is where they are at, and this is where the concentration of infrastructure is at. So you must acknowledge that port ownership. How would you deal with it? Oh, I want to put, I want to put an event there. I want to do this there. I want to put a public walkway there. Well, how are you going to do that? There are definitely ways. Let's all work them out. That might be about fencing or time windows or choosing particular days or choosing particular seasons or inviting the portmaster to a cup of tea, as he has invited me, and I'm planning to go on the next couple of weeks, maybe in your break. How do we build these relationships? I don't think it's impossible. I just think it needs some good lateral thinking. Astrid Hewell's septet talk. Now, she went into some great images, and I won't go into them all, but I do think they're worth looking over a few. And I just want to move this lecture into a much more visual stage, hooray, and just to warn you about that we're about to look at quite a lot of big top-down, well-funded, cool projects. What's it called? I always forget. Park and Play. Such a great name. Such a great name. So let's have a quick look at it, and I'm apologising. I'm going to be very clunky about this. And what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Oh my God, good to work this out before. I'm going to just shift just because it was easier. And I'm just going to move to where I've got them stashed in another suite of another series of images. And I think I'm just going to be lazy and we'll jump to them. So let's just do that. So Park and Play, Cass has gone over it, but there's so many good things working here that are relevant to your site. Activating the tops of some of these big industrial buildings, you immediately get a connection to the horizon that this site does not have. So you're immediately playing into this fundamental asset of this horizon obstructive view, and you're making a very active intervention about, I think we could do this better. How you'd negotiate that on a port building, getting people up there, is not impossible. I think people should be trying those sorts of things. This is a very wonderful scale project in that it's right next to the port and what they're able to achieve in all sorts of ways. But Astrid went over that very well last week, and so I won't spend too much time there. This concept of the Belvedere is crosses many disciplines, certainly architecture and landscape architecture, and it crosses many sites. And it crosses White Bay last year as well as this site, I think, particularly when I imagine this kind of scenario, because you do have the ocean is just there. Everything's just there. It's just a bit high. I mean, yeah, you're a bit low and it's a bit high, but, this idea of potentially creating a Belvedere, which traditionally means a beautiful far view. And I've put some of those images there very specifically. The Villa Savoy on the bottom left, the sort of Baroque classical symmetrical favourite, is very much a built form of that, creating this beautiful far view. and adding on sort of architecturally an insertion of a proportion of space. Just to hold that thought as we look through some of these prize winning projects from last year's Rosa Barber Landscape Prize. This idea of inserting a belvedere, you know, I look at that and I think, that's really interesting. Like, how do you get back and forth to some of these big buildings? How do you actually begin to manifest a public space on private land, you know, on private land with many fences on the ground? You know, is that a way to just sort of be going up? You know, look at how you negotiate people going up. You know, I thought that's kind of quite nice. That's the White Base site from last year, and which was made of belvederes. Your site is not. Your site is much more inward, and so I think to create a belvedere needs to be much more intentional. Lighting possibilities, just to pick up from where Asta was talking with Septi, and again from the Rosa Barbara Prize, this of the Shugang steel plant in China, but some good use of lighting at night here onto these buildings. Now, whether this was a post-industrial site or a working port, I think the scale of these and the way they're working with lighting at night, these warm tones, I think these are things to learn from. The constant lighting, we don't sort of see floodlights suddenly. Here we kind of do, but they're brought lower, and there's potentially ways this could be done even better in a sort of septed format. But there's a evenness to the lighting around, and people, you know, we have territory, we have placemaking there. How you do that on the site, again, this idea of tall lights and how you potentially can be bringing them down, and certainly port areas are often areas where there are very tall lights. I meant to put in an image from Prince Alfred Park here, and I've forgotten Sue Barnsley's Prince Alfred Park that deal with those lights, but bringing lighting down, and here it happens very intentionally. Let's see it in that scale, and lights can work to a certain scale. Here we have it again on a post-industrial site, now with residential development in it. There may be a suggestion from some of you that you might be going to do that on this site as well, be adding some residential. I guess my comment to that is, again, mitigate or buy or adapt. If you're mitigating, I suspect, you know, I think you could be working into a more long-term building way of thinking. If you're adapting, I think you most likely need to be looking at building types that are potentially short-term, you know, maybe sea containers, maybe movable homes, how you deal with floodwaters coming in. Nothing's impossible. It's about dealing with the systems. But, you know, looking at some of these lightings of this sort of scale, and where the lighting mediates between human scale and large scale of gantry cranes and towers is very, very well done within these projects and with ships. Catherine Gustafson's work has always been very beautiful. The project she won this fall last year was the Parc Central de Valencia. Again, a wonderful example of low continuous lighting there, creating territory surveillance. There's seating there, you can see, you know, the viewer can see the viewers. Oh, is that right? The viewed can see the viewers. It's a theatre unto itself. Oh, Brian, I did put it in. Prince Alfred Park lighting by Sue Barnsley is very septed here in Sydney. It's very Jane Jacobs, eyes on the street, even at night. Could it be warmer tones? Could it be lower? Could it be more ambient? Maybe. But you know, here and there, it's quite a bright blue light. It does feel like along the path could potentially be a bit warmer. If I was sitting at Sue's office and I'd just seen Astrid's talk, maybe I would suggest that and say, hey, Sue, should we put red filters on them? And I'd see what Sue says. But I like to look at projects with this thinking of sort of the new knowledge that keeps popping in and out of our minds. Oh, hooray, look at this. Here's a project that is by my very good friend and close colleague, Leanne O'Shea, landscape architect, and myself from over 20 years ago. It's Randazzo Park down in Melbourne. Yeah, we won a state award for it, which is really pretty exciting for us. But the park was called Randazzo, and I guess we were always working on, and it's a design head and material sort of way of thinking, and it's I feel like the second part of this term we move more into these conversations, but I've always felt this multiple use, where objects have multiple uses, I think, is a strong way to think. So where a bollard can also be a seat for a teenager, can also be the lighting of the park, can also be the title and naming of the park, can also be artwork, can be 5 things all at once. I think that's always going to be a better, stronger decision that you can put more funding into that object. God, we need bollards to keep the cars driving to the park. God, we need a signage, blah, 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 blah. If you can just wrap up in a nice bow many elements into one strong intervention, it's always the best decision. Should I do this? Should I do that? The question I'd have for you is how many elements can fit into, how little can you do, and how strong and sort of precise can those interventions be? And that will be the best design decision. That crazy little purple line at the back is our lighting. Astrid Heward worked with us on that. The reason Leanne and I met Astrid is we sat in the Noodle Bar in Melbourne about 24 years ago and loved a light. Had to find out who designed it. It was Astrid, and that's how we found the mighty Astrid. And as architect, and she had quite a name for herself at the time about lighting. And we asked her if she'd work on this public lighting system with us in a park, which she did with over in that purple light, which runs under a long seat. There it is in steel mesh, that when you put 2 pieces of steel mesh on top of each other of a fine grade, you get this really beautiful moire pattern like that. The also very wonderful Marlena Krantz, who's a shoemaker and fashion maker and designer. She helped fabricate those lights with us. Astrid went off and had a baby at the time, and we needed to get somebody else in, and Marlena joined us, and just it was always awesome working with 3 terrific women, I have to say. Wonderful professional. Lighting is detail design. Lighting is ambient. It allows for almost minimal additional poles on the site. So we were able to sort of wedge our lighting into our biggest element. Elements are all multifunctional. The seat is the light. The seat is the view line. It sort of frames these views out into adjacent streets and laneways. It's the gateway. You can't quite see on that seat, but that seat, you can walk through those 2 seats, and that's the entrance to the playground. It's the safety fence, so it's also the fence to the playground, and it's the theatre. You know, it sets up this kind of theatre sense of this not very large park in suburban East Brunswick. And we just, what do? We played with scale, I guess, you know, rather than this idea of a bench. Like, what can a bench be? It can be the whole site. And there was something fun and magnificent about it for us to do. And there's the site as it kind of pinged around. That's looking from the other direction, so you can't see the letters. And using mounding. And we were trying to use topography to just hold the open space down. What are we saying here? Multifunctional lighting is the bollard part. You know this. The teenage perch seat works at multiple scales. It works to driving a car scale as signage. It's got a road alongside it. So people could see it, and the lights kind of blur as you drive past. I always think as a designer, keep thinking of what you don't need to add in. What can I get away with not putting in? Do we need steps? I don't know. Do we need extra lights? What can we not put in? God, we have to put a sign in. Do we? How else can we do that sign? Or, you know, do we need a bin? Do we? Where can we hide it? Or can we make it extra large? Can it be the artwork? Like, you know, how do you create place? And I think part of that is trying to not put too much in. And honestly, when I look at this project and another one we might look at later, I think there's too much stuff in it, and I think it's a bit rah-rah. But hey, it was an early project, and I was very thrilled to have done it. But how can one element provide multiple solutions? Oh, look, I say that. I think Randazzo is a little over-furnished and a little overcooked. And I do ponder what we do differently. Astrid talked about this, the promenade, as a typology. And I think it's relevant to Carrington. It's certainly got these it's certainly got promenades on its edge. The trouble is, seems at least more than 2/3 are port owned. So navigating that with some sense of acupuncture, I suspect, or some sense of action, activating, is going to be an opportunity. Here is again another Rosa Barber Landscape Prize nominee in Spain. But they're doing a very nice job of sort of navigating that level change. You know, you can imagine this water coming up over the next 100 years and what becomes accessible and what doesn't. Again, here, this idea of a sort of, what's the word for that? I've forgotten the word. A jutty-outy thing, a sort of viewing platform, I think might be potential to work with that, with the idea of marina and boats coming up, the idea of also jutting out, allowing the pedestrians, the public, to view things. I think you could look into that. Well, just looking at that edge, that Spanish edge, sorry, ignore that one, that's from another lecture. That Spanish edge, what they're doing with that riprap. So, you know, I think this kind of level of detailing is relevant. The pedibus in Florence, which Astrid talked about, is just excellent, let's be honest. It's made for you, Jamie, this idea of picking children up as a walking thing, but just to look over some of the detailing of these very small-scale interventions, this idea of the episodic, I would think that's something anyone could be using with trying to walk around the edge of this site. How do you create episodes, potentially amidst, you know, the large-scale movement of ships and trains? I think there's real potential for that on this site. How do you invite people by urban acupuncture to be part of, to cross over? How do you invite the port to be part of the Carrington public area? How do you invite, vice versa, Carrington public, particularly school, particularly people living and working there, to be part of the port? This site, I really thought, shall I show it to you or not? And I'm sure many people know it because it's been around for 1,000 years, but I don't know, it just always